Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The marketplace reeked of overripe fruit and desperation. I could smell it in the air. That particular blend of rotting produce and human anxiety that clung to the lower district like a second skin. My fingers trembled as I approached the bakery stall, clutching the few copper coins I'd managed to scrape together from mending clothes in the dim light of our crumbling apartment. The weight of them felt both precious and pathetic in my palm. "Excuse me," I whispered to the baker's assistant, a round-faced woman who barely glanced my way. She was arranging fresh pastries in the window display, each one golden and perfect, each one worth more than I'd earn in a week. She didn't respond. I wasn't surprised. People like me, the forgotten ones, the widowed, the poor, we were background noise in a city that celebrated strength and status above all else. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time, though my voice still carried that apologetic tremor I hated. "Is there any expired cake for my daughter?" The words hung in the air, naked and humiliating. Around me, I felt the shift in atmosphere. The way conversations paused, the way eyes found me and then quickly looked away. Shame burned hot across my cheeks, turning my pale complexion into a map of my mortification. My light blonde hair, limp from the morning rain, stuck to my neck as I forced myself to keep standing there, waiting. The assistant finally turned, her lips pressed into a thin line of disdain. "Expired?" She said the word as if I'd asked for something obscene. "We don't sell expired goods here. This is a respectable establishment." Of course it was. Everything in the central marketplace was respectable, proper, appropriate for the werewolf elite who lived in the towering estates on the hill. The pack structure demanded perfection, and even the bakeries reflected that hierarchical obsession. "I understand," I said quickly, my voice dropping back to that mouse-quiet tone that made me invisible. "I just thought, maybe something from yesterday, something that would be thrown away anyway." "It's her birthday and we compost our day-old products," the woman interrupted, already turning back to her display. "Perhaps try the lower market tomorrow morning. They sometimes have options for people in your situation." People in your situation. The phrase was a polite way of saying people who don't matter. People without pack protection. People whose mates had died in territory disputes, leaving them vulnerable and alone with children to raise in a world that respected only strength and belonging. I nodded, stepping back from the stall, my coins still clutched uselessly in my hand. Emma would understand. She always did. At 7 years old, my daughter had already learned not to expect much, not to ask for things we couldn't afford. But God, I'd wanted to give her something special today, something that tasted like childhood should taste, sweet and celebratory and full of possibility. The marketplace blurred around me as I walked, my vision swimming with tears I refused to shed in public. The afternoon sun filtered through the canvas awnings overhead, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to mirror the divided nature of our city. Light for some, shadow for the rest of us. I'd almost reached the edge of the market when I heard it. A low, collective gasp that rippled through the crowd like wind across water. The kind of sound that makes your spine straighten instinctively, your body recognizing danger before your mind catches up. The crowd was parting, not just stepping aside, but pressing themselves back against stalls and walls, creating a wide corridor through the center of the marketplace. My heart began to hammer against my ribs as I followed the direction of everyone's stares. They were coming from the northern entrance. 4 massive men, each one radiating the kind of power that made the air feel heavy and electric. Warriors, elite guards. Their eyes scanned the crowd with predatory precision, and even from a distance, I could see the way their muscles moved beneath their dark clothing, fluid and dangerous, more wolf than human even in this form. but it was the figure walking between them that made my breath catch and hold. He was taller than his guards, which seemed impossible given their size. His presence alone seemed to compress the space around him, making the bustling marketplace feel suddenly small and airless. Dark hair, almost black, caught the afternoon light. His features were carved from something harder than stone, all sharp angles and uncompromising lines. He wore simple clothes, dark and well-fitted, but there was nothing simple about the way he carried himself. Every movement spoke of absolute certainty, of power so intrinsic it didn't need to be announced. The Alpha King? Someone whispered nearby, the words barely audible but charged with electricity. My heart stopped. Demon Silvercrest, the ruler of the Northern Territories. The most powerful werewolf in 5 kingdoms. I'd never seen him in person. People like me didn't exist in the same spaces as royalty, but I'd heard the stories. Everyone had. They said he'd taken the throne at 23 after a challenge that left 3 rival alphas dead. They said he could shift faster than thought, that his wolf form was the size of a small horse. They said he was brilliant and brutal, strategic and savage. They said he never smiled. I pressed myself back against a fruit vendor's stall, trying to become invisible. Whatever brought him here, it had nothing to do with me. Royalty didn't notice shadows. But then something impossible happened. His head turned. Those dark eyes. Not brown, but something deeper. Something that held its own gravity. Swept across the crowd and stopped. On me. Time fractured into strange, suspended moments. I couldn't look away. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. His expression didn't change. No warmth. No recognition. Nothing that suggested I was more than a curiosity. But he was looking directly at me. The weight of his attention felt physical, like pressure against my chest. One of his guards leaned in, saying something I couldn't hear. The Alpha King's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then, still holding my gaze, he spoke. His voice carried across the marketplace despite its low pitch, resonating with a quality that made everyone fall silent. That woman. He lifted one hand, pointing directly at me. Bring her. The marketplace erupted into whispers. My legs went liquid beneath me. This couldn't be happening. This was a mistake. I was nobody. A widow struggling to feed her daughter. A ghost haunting the edges of society. Alpha Kings didn't notice people like me. But his guards were already moving, cutting through the crowd with purposeful strides. I wanted to run. Wanted to disappear into the labyrinth of stalls and alleys I knew so well. But my body had betrayed me, frozen in place like a rabbit watching the approach of wolves. Please, I managed to whisper as they reached me, though I had no idea what I was asking for. Please let this be a mistake. Please don't hurt me. Please let Emma still have a mother when this is over. The lead guard, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, looked at me with something that might have been curiosity or might have been pity. The Alpha King has requested your presence, he said, his tone formal but not unkind. You're not in trouble. Come, not in trouble. The words should have been reassuring, but in my experience, powerful people didn't distinguish between inconvenience and trouble. Both ended the same way for people like me. I forced my legs to move, forced myself to walk toward where the Alpha King waited at the center of a space the crowd had cleared. Every eye in the marketplace was on me. I could feel their stares like brands against my skin, could hear the whispers intensifying. Speculation, judgment, curiosity, all mixing into a sound like distant thunder. As I got closer, the sheer physicality of him became overwhelming. He was perhaps 6'4", broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that seemed to pull at the air itself. This close, I could see the details the distance had hidden. The small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his dark eyes held flecks of amber that caught the light, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he was holding something back. I stopped a respectful distance away and lowered my eyes, every instinct screaming at me not to meet the gaze of an apex predator. My hands trembled at my sides, and I clasped them together to still the shaking. Look at me. The command was quiet but absolute. I raised my eyes slowly, fighting against every survival instinct that told me submission was safety. When my gaze finally met his, I was surprised to find not anger there, but something else. Something I couldn't quite name. an intensity that felt like being studied, analyzed, understood in ways that made me want to hide. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," I whispered. "Sarah Morrison." He nodded once, a sharp, economical movement. "I heard what you asked for, at the bakery stall." Oh, God. Horror washed over me in a cold wave. He'd heard that? He'd heard me begging for expired cake like some... "Your daughter's birthday," he continued, his expression still unreadable. "How old?" "7, I managed, my voice barely audible. "Today. She's 7 today." Something flickered behind his eyes, too fast for me to catch, but definitely there. He turned to one of his guards, Dorian. The scarred guard stepped forward immediately. "Yes, my king. Go to the Crystal Rose Bakery. Tell them I want their finest celebration cake. Something appropriate for a child. Have it delivered to..." He paused, those dark eyes returning to me. "Where?" My mouth opened, but no sound came out. This couldn't be real. Alpha Kings didn't buy cakes for the children of strangers. This had to be some kind of test, some trap I didn't understand. "The lower district," I finally whispered. "Building 7, apartment 3C. He repeated the address to his guard, who nodded and disappeared into the crowd with supernatural speed. The remaining guards maintained their positions, creating a bubble of space around us that felt both protective and suffocating. "Your mate?" the Alpha King asked, and there was something careful in his tone now. Something that suggested he already knew the answer. "Dead," I said, the word sharp and final. 2 years ago. Territory dispute on the eastern border. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Name?" "James Morrison." I paused, then added because it seemed important somehow. "He was a good man. A good father." "I remember the eastern conflicts," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words should have been perfunctory, the kind of thing leaders said because protocol demanded it. But there was a weight to them, a sincerity that caught me off guard. I found myself studying his face, looking for the brutal tyrant from the stories. But all I saw was a man whose eyes held the kind of weariness that comes from carrying too much for too long. "Thank you," I whispered. "But you didn't need to. I mean, the cake. It's too much. I can't possibly..." "You can," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "And you will. No child should go without on her birthday." There was something in the way he said it. Something that spoke of old wounds, old memories that still had teeth. I wanted to ask, wanted to understand why this mattered to him, but the gap between our worlds was too vast for such familiar questions. "I don't understand why you're doing this," I said instead, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I'm nobody. Just another widow trying to survive." His eyes held mine for a long moment, and I felt that strange, suspended sensation again, like the world had narrowed to just this moment, just the two of us standing in a marketplace full of watching eyes. "Nobody is just anything," he said finally. His voice was low enough that only I could hear it, intimate in a way that made my pulse stutter. "Remember that." Before I could respond, before I could process what he'd said or what it might mean, he stepped back. The spell, if that's what it had been, broke. He was the Alpha King again, distant and untouchable, and I was just a poor widow who'd caught his attention for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom. "Enjoy your daughter's birthday, Sarah Morrison," he said, his formal tone restored. Then, to his remaining guards, "We're leaving." They moved as one, creating that protective formation around him, and the crowd parted once more. I stood frozen in place, watching as he walked away, his dark figure cutting through the marketplace like a blade through water. Just before he disappeared from view, he glanced back. Our eyes met one final time, and then he was gone. The marketplace erupted around me, voices rising in excited speculation, people pressing closer with questions I couldn't begin to answer, but I barely heard them. My mind was still caught on that last look, on the weight of his attention, on the impossible kindness of a man known for his ruthlessness, what had just happened, and more terrifying still, what did it mean? I ran home through the winding streets of the lower district, my heart still hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, painting the crumbling buildings in shades of amber and gold that did nothing to disguise their decay. My mind couldn't stop replaying the scene, his eyes on me, that commanding voice, the impossible gesture of kindness that felt more like a dream than reality. Emma was waiting by the window when I burst through the door, her small face pressed against the cloudy glass. She turned at the sound, her light blonde hair, so like mine but brighter, untouched by worry, catching the fading sunlight. Her smile was immediate and complete, the kind of pure joy that made every struggle worthwhile. "Mama!" She launched herself at me, small arms wrapping around my waist. "Did you find a cake?" I held her tight, breathing in the scent of the lavender soap we used sparingly, the underlying sweetness that was just her. How could I explain what had happened? How could I tell her that the most powerful man in the territories had heard me begging for scraps and decided to intervene? "Something better than I expected," I said carefully, kneeling to her level. My hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing across cheeks still soft with childhood. "The most beautiful cake you've ever seen is coming, from the Crystal Rose Bakery." Her eyes went wide. "The fancy one, with the gold doors? That's the one. But Mama, how—" She stopped, confusion and wonder warring across her features. At 7, she already understood the mathematics of our poverty too well. "Someone kind helped us," I said, which was true even if it was impossibly incomplete. "Someone who thought you deserved something special for your birthday." Before she could ask more questions, there was a knock at the door, not the usual aggressive pounding of landlords or the tentative tap of neighbors, but something firm and official. My stomach dropped. I opened the door to find a young man in the crisp uniform of the Crystal Rose, holding a box that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Behind him stood Dorian, the scarred guard from the marketplace, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "Delivery for Miss Emma Morrison," the baker's assistant said, his tone respectful in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. People didn't speak to me like that. "With compliments from His Majesty." Emma's gasp was audible. She pressed against my side, staring at the box with a mixture of awe and fear. The baker carefully placed it on our small kitchen table, which suddenly looked even more battered and inadequate next to such elegance. "There's also this," Dorian said, stepping forward with a smaller package. The Alpha King thought the birthday girl might enjoy a few additional treats. He handed it to me, and I took it with trembling fingers. Inside were chocolates, real ones, not the cheap candy we occasionally splurged on, wrapped in silver foil that caught the light like tiny stars. There was also a small card, heavy cream paper with elegant script. For Emma. "May your 7th year bring you joy, DS." "Please thank His Majesty," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotions I couldn't name. It's too generous." Dorian's scarred face softened slightly. "The Alpha King doesn't do anything he doesn't wish to do," he said, and there was something in his tone. A warning, maybe, or a reassurance. "Enjoy your evening." They left, and I closed the door with shaking hands. Emma had already lifted the lid of the cake box, her exclamation of delight piercing through my shock. The cake was a masterpiece, 3 layers decorated with delicate sugar flowers in shades of pink and cream, with "Happy Birthday, Emma" written in gold icing that actually shimmered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Emma whispered, her voice reverent. "Can we really eat it?" "Every bite," I assured her, pulling her close. "That's what it's for." We cut into it together, the knife sliding through layers that were impossibly soft and rich. The first bite melted on my tongue, vanilla and butter and something else. Something that tasted like celebration itself. Emma's eyes closed in bliss, chocolate smudging the corner of her mouth. "Mama," she said after her 3rd bite, "who is the Alpha King? Why did he help us?" I set down my fork, considering how to answer. The truth was, I didn't know. Powerful men didn't notice women like me unless they wanted something, and I couldn't imagine what someone like Demon Silvercrest could possibly want from a poor widow in the lower district. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," I said finally. But sometimes people surprise us. Sometimes kindness comes from unexpected places. She seemed to accept this, turning her attention back to the cake with single-minded focus. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That whatever had begun in the marketplace that afternoon was just the opening chapter of something I didn't yet understand. The next morning arrived with unexpected visitors. I'd just finished braiding Emma's hair for school when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, authoritative and unyielding. Through the clouded glass of our door, I could make out 2 figures, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably military in their bearing. "Mama?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "Go to your room," I said quietly. Just for a moment. She obeyed without argument, sensing my tension. I opened the door to find 2 royal guards in formal uniform. Not the casual wear from yesterday, but the full ceremonial attire that marked them as members of the Alpha King's personal detail. "Sarah Morrison?" the taller one asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "Yes." "His Majesty requests your presence at the palace. Today. At 2 o'clock. The words hit me like cold water. The palace. The Alpha King wanted to see me again. This couldn't be real. I don't understand. Why would he? "We're not privy to His Majesty's reasons," the guard said, not unkindly. "Only his commands. A car will arrive at 1:30 to transport you. Dress appropriately but not formally. This is not a state function." What did that even mean? I owned 3 dresses, one for everyday wear that was patched at the elbows, one slightly nicer for rare occasions, and one black dress I'd worn to James's funeral and hadn't touched since. None of them were appropriate for meeting a king. "My daughter," I started. "Arrangements have been made. A trusted caretaker will arrive at 1 o'clock. She comes highly recommended and has been thoroughly vetted." He paused, something almost sympathetic crossing his features. "This is not optional, Mrs. Morrison. But you're not in danger. His Majesty simply wishes to speak with you." They left before I could form another protest. I stood in the doorway, my mind spinning with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. What could the Alpha King possibly want to discuss with me? Had I done something wrong? Said something yesterday that I shouldn't have? Emma emerged from her room, her small face creased with worry. "Are you in trouble?" "No, baby. I don't think so." I hoped I sounded more confident than I felt. "I just have to go somewhere this afternoon. Someone will stay with you. Will you come back?" The question broke my heart. At 7 years old, she'd already learned that people leave and sometimes don't return. Her father had taught her that lesson, though not by choice. "Always," I promised, pulling her into a fierce hug. "I will always come back to you." "That's not a maybe, Emma. That's a certainty." The caretaker arrived precisely at 1, a kind-faced older woman named Margaret, who carried herself with quiet competence. She had silver hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled at Emma. "I brought books," she said, producing a small bag, "and materials for art projects if you're interested. I understand it was recently your birthday?" Emma nodded shyly, immediately drawn to this gentle presence. I felt a small measure of relief watching them interact, seeing my daughter's shoulders relax. The car that arrived at 1:30 was unlike anything I'd ever ridden in, sleek black exterior, interior that smelled of leather and luxury. The driver, another guard, silent and professional, held the door open for me with a respect that felt surreal. I climbed in awkwardly, hyper-aware of my worn dress, my nervous hands, the way I didn't belong in spaces this clean and expensive. The drive to the palace took 20 minutes, winding up from the lower district through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we reached the hilltop, where the royal estate sprawled across acres of manicured grounds. The palace itself was stunning. Ancient stone architecture married to modern fortifications, towers reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for something divine. We entered through a side gate, avoiding the main ceremonial entrance. The guard led me through corridors that seemed designed to overwhelm. High ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than my building, floors so polished I could see my reflection. Other staff members passed us, their curious glances making my skin prickle with self-consciousness. Finally, we stopped before a heavy wooden door. The guard knocked once, waited for a response I couldn't hear, then opened it. "Mrs. Morrison, Your Majesty." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. My legs felt disconnected from my body as I walked through the doorway into what appeared to be a private study. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city below, offering a view that made the world seem both vast and manageable. Books lined the walls, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, their spines creating a mosaic of knowledge and history. And there, standing by the window with his back to me, was the Alpha King. He turned at the sound of the door closing, and once again I was struck by the sheer presence of him. In the marketplace, surrounded by crowds and chaos, he'd been imposing. Here, in this private space, he seemed even more so. A predator in his den, comfortable and absolutely in control. Sarah. My name on his lips sounded different than it ever had before, weighted with something I couldn't identify. "Thank you for coming." Did I have a choice? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Too honest, too bold. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. "No," he admitted. "But I'm grateful, nonetheless." He gestured to a pair of chairs positioned near the window, away from the imposing desk that dominated one side of the room. I sat, perching on the edge of the seat like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. He took the chair opposite me, and for a moment we simply looked at each other. His dark eyes were just as intense as I remembered, but here, in the natural light, I could see the amber flecks more clearly, the way they seemed to shift and catch like embers in a fire. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," he said finally. Among other things, my voice was steadier than I felt. Yesterday in the marketplace, the cake, and now this. I don't understand. Men like you don't notice women like me unless they want something. "Men like me," he repeated, and there was something almost bitter in his tone. "What kind of man do you think I am, Sarah?" The question felt like a trap, but I'd already come too far for careful diplomacy. "Powerful," I said. "Dangerous. Someone who gets what he wants because no one can tell him no." I paused, then added more quietly, "Someone who probably doesn't hear the truth very often." He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A low, rough sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. "You're right," he said. "On all counts." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, bringing us into a space that felt suddenly more intimate. "But you're also wrong about why I noticed you." "Then why?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Why did you stop in the marketplace? Why did you help us? Why am I here?" His jaw tightened, and I watched something struggle behind his eyes. Some internal war between saying what he wanted and maintaining whatever walls he'd built around himself. "Because," he said finally, each word measured and careful, "I heard you ask for expired cake for your daughter, and something about that moment, about your voice, your desperation, your love." He stopped, shook his head. It reminded me that power means nothing if it can't be used to ease suffering, even small suffering, even for one child's birthday. The sincerity in his voice was devastating. This wasn't the brutal tyrant from the stories. This was a man who carried the weight of an entire kingdom and still found space to care about one struggling widow and her daughter. "Thank you," I whispered. "Emma has been happier in the last day than I've seen her in 2 years." "Whatever your reasons, whatever this is, thank you," he nodded. But there was something else now, something lurking beneath the surface of this conversation. I could feel it like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. "There's something else," I said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He stood, moving to the window, putting distance between us. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the space like a physical touch. "I want to offer you a position here, at the palace." My breath caught. "What kind of position?" "We need someone to manage the staff quarters in the East Wing. It's administrative work, scheduling, inventory, basic management. The pay is good. Very good. Enough for you to move out of the lower district. to give your daughter opportunities. He turned to face me, his expression carefully neutral. To give you security. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why? I asked again, standing now to meet his gaze more directly. Why me? There must be dozens of qualified people who would take that position. People with experience, with connections, with... Because I want someone I can trust, he interrupted. Someone who isn't here because of politics or family connections or ambition. Someone who asked for expired cake instead of stealing a fresh one. Someone who clearly puts her child before her pride. His words were logical, reasonable even. But there was something else beneath them, something I could sense but not see. Like shadows moving just beyond the edge of vision. I need to think about it, I said, though every practical instinct screamed at me to accept immediately. This was a lifeline, a way out of poverty, a chance to give Emma everything I'd ever wanted for her. Of course. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of him, cedar and something darker. Something that made my pulse quicken despite my best efforts. Take all the time you need. But Sarah? He paused until I met his eyes. I hope you'll say yes. The way he said it, the quiet intensity, the hint of something vulnerable beneath the command, made me feel like this conversation was about more than just a job offer. Like we were dancing around something neither of us was ready to name. I should get back to Emma, I said, needing to escape the weight of his attention, the confusing tangle of emotions he provoked. Of course. The car will take you home. He walked me to the door, his presence a warm pressure at my back. Just before I stepped through, he spoke again. Sarah, your daughter is lucky to have you. I turned back, found him watching me with an expression that held too many layers to parse. Thank you, I managed. For everything. As the car wound back down to the lower district, I pressed my forehead against the cool window and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The Alpha King, Demon Silvercrest, the most powerful werewolf in 5 kingdoms, had offered me a job. Had looked at me like I mattered, had made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt since James died. It should have felt like a blessing. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes silent and still. I didn't know yet if I should step forward or run. 3 days passed before I gave him my answer. 3 days of sleepless nights, of weighing poverty against uncertainty, of watching Emma practice her letters by candlelight because we couldn't afford to waste electricity. 3 days of Margaret, the kind caretaker, stopping by with small gifts. Fresh bread, a warm sweater for Emma, books that looked barely touched, gifts that felt like gentle pressure, like the palace reminding me of what I could have if I just said yes. On the 3rd evening, I sent word through one of the guards who had begun making regular patrols past our building. The answer was simple. I would accept the position. The response came within hours. I was to begin in 1 week. Housing would be provided, a suite in the staff quarters, 2 bedrooms, private bathroom, access to the palace kitchens and facilities. Emma could attend the palace school, where children of staff and lesser nobles learned together. Our lives would change completely, irrevocably. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like I was signing a contract written in a language I couldn't quite read. Moving day arrived with unseasonable warmth. Spring had begun asserting itself, pushing back against winter's lingering grip with determined sunshine and the smell of things growing. Margaret arrived early with 2 young guards who handled our meager possessions with surprising care, packing our entire life into boxes that looked half empty even when full. Emma bounced with excitement, her earlier fears forgotten in the thrill of adventure. She chattered constantly about her new room, her new school, the possibility of making friends who didn't understand what it meant to go hungry. Her joy was infectious and heartbreaking in equal measure, so easy to please, so desperate for something better. The suite they'd given us was in the eastern wing, as promised. It was larger than our entire previous apartment, with windows that actually opened and floors that didn't creak threateningly underfoot. Emma's room had a bed with a real mattress, not the thin pallet we'd shared in our old place. There was a sitting area, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom with hot water that ran clear instead of rust brown. "Mama, there's a bathtub." Emma's voice echoed from the bathroom, filled with wonder. A whole bathtub just for us. I stood in the center of the sitting room, turning slowly to take it all in. This was real. This was happening. We were living in the palace, breathing the same air as royalty, existing in a world I'd only ever glimpsed from a distance. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Dorian, the scarred guard from the marketplace, now wearing a less formal uniform that suggested he was off duty. "Mrs. Morrison," he said with a slight nod, "I'm to show you the staff areas and introduce you to your primary responsibilities. If now is a good time?" "Of course." I glanced back toward Emma's room, hearing her singing to herself as she unpacked her few belongings. "Margaret is on her way up," he assured me. "She's been assigned as Emma's primary caretaker when you're working. His Majesty wanted to ensure continuity since they already get along well." His Majesty. The word sent a strange flutter through my chest. In the 3 days since my acceptance, I hadn't seen Demon again. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined the intensity of our interaction, if I'd projected meaning onto what was simply a charitable impulse from a king toward his subjects. I followed Dorian through corridors that twisted and turned like a maze, each passage looking similar but subtly different. He pointed out important locations: the main staff dining hall, the supply rooms, the administrative offices where I'd be spending most of my time. Other staff members passed us, their expressions curious but not unfriendly. A few even offered small smiles or nods of acknowledgement. "You'll find the palace staff are good people," Dorian said as we climbed a narrow staircase. "Loyal, hardworking. Some have been here for generations. They might be curious about you at first, but they'll warm up quickly enough." "Curious why?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. He glanced at me, something knowing in his expression. "Because His Majesty personally recruited you. That's rare. He usually leaves staffing decisions to the household managers." We emerged into a large room filled with desks, filing cabinets, and the organized chaos of administrative work. A woman looked up from one of the desks, mid-40s, sharp eyes, brown hair pulled into a severe bun. Her expression was assessing, but not hostile. "Celine," Dorian said, "this is Sarah Morrison, our new East Wing coordinator. Sarah, this is Celine Drake, head of household operations. She'll be your direct supervisor." Celine stood, offering her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "Welcome to the palace, Mrs. Morrison. I've heard interesting things about your recruitment." "I'm sure you have," I said carefully. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "Don't worry. I don't traffic in gossip, only results. Your responsibilities will primarily involve managing the staff quarters in the East Wing, scheduling cleaners, coordinating maintenance requests, ensuring supplies are properly stocked and distributed. Think of yourself as a liaison between the staff and administration." She spent the next hour walking me through systems and procedures, introducing me to key personnel, explaining the intricate hierarchy that governed palace life. It was overwhelming but manageable, familiar in the way all administrative work was familiar regardless of setting. By the time Dorian escorted me back to my suite, my head was spinning with information. I found Emma curled up on the sofa with Margaret, both of them absorbed in a picture book. The sight of my daughter looking so comfortable, so safe, made something tight in my chest finally loosen. "How was it?" Margaret asked, looking up with her kind, crinkled eyes. "Complicated, but good," I said honestly. "Thank you for staying with her." "My pleasure. Emma and I are becoming fast friends." She stood, gathering her things. "I'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 to walk her to school. The other children are wonderful. She'll fit right in." After Margaret left, Emma and I ate dinner in our small kitchenette. Simple food from the staff dining hall that still tasted better than anything I'd managed to scrape together in our old apartment. She talked excitedly about her day, about the books Margaret had brought, about the bed that was soft as clouds, Mama, I promise. I tucked her in that night, watching her drift off with a smile on her face, her light blonde hair spread across the pillow like spilled sunlight. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. I didn't see Demon for 2 weeks. I fell into the rhythm of palace life, early mornings coordinating with the cleaning staff, Afternoons managing supply inventory, evenings reviewing schedules and handling minor crises. The work was demanding but satisfying in a way my previous piecemeal jobs had never been. I was good at organization, at managing people, at finding solutions to small problems before they became large ones. Emma thrived. She made friends quickly, other staff children who welcomed her without the judgment we'd faced in the lower district. She came home each day with stories about lessons and games, her vocabulary expanding, her confidence growing. The transformation was remarkable and deeply moving, but in quiet moments, I found myself thinking about him. About dark eyes with amber flecks, about a voice that could command armies or offer kindness with equal intensity, about the way he'd looked at me in his study, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. I told myself it meant nothing, that I was a widow employed by the palace, nothing more, that whatever I'd felt in those brief encounters was just the natural awe anyone would feel in the presence of someone so powerful. I almost convinced myself it was true. Then one evening, as I was leaving the administrative offices after a particularly long day, I rounded a corner and nearly collided with him. He caught my arms, steadying me, and for a moment we were close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, could smell cedar and night air and something uniquely him. Sarah. My name again, in that voice that did strange things to my equilibrium. I'm sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going, an Alpha King apologizing to a staff member. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. No, it was my fault. I was distracted. He released my arms but didn't step back, maintaining that small space between us that felt both too close and not close enough. He was dressed casually, dark pants, a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that spoke of violence survived. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "You and Emma?" "Well, very well, actually." I forced myself to meet his eyes, to not show how much his proximity affected me. "Thank you for all of this. The position, the housing, the school. It's more than I ever could have hoped for." "You're earning it," he said. "Celine tells me you're exceeding expectations, that you've already implemented several improvements to the scheduling system." Heat crept into my cheeks. I just saw some inefficiencies and thought, "Don't diminish your contributions." There was something almost sharp in his tone, like he was offended on my behalf. "You're intelligent and capable. Own that." We stood there in the corridor, the space between us charged with something I couldn't name but could definitely feel. Other staff members passed, their curious glances sliding over us before they hurried on. Being seen alone with the Alpha King, standing this close, would definitely fuel gossip. I should step back, excuse myself, maintain appropriate boundaries. I didn't move. "I should let you get back to Emma," he said finally, though he made no move to leave. "But, Sarah, I'm glad you're here." The way he said it, the quiet intensity, the hint of something vulnerable beneath the formality, made my breath catch. This felt like more than a king appreciating a competent employee. This felt personal in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. "I'm glad too," I admitted, the words coming out softer than I'd intended. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, then stepped back. The loss of his proximity felt almost physical, like something essential had been removed from the air between us. He moved past me, his shoulder brushing mine for just a moment, and then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to convince myself I'd imagined the heat in his gaze, the reluctance in his departure, trying to ignore the small, dangerous part of me that wanted him to come back. The following week, everything changed. It started with tension in the palace. Subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. Guards doubled their patrols. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when staff approached. Even Celine, normally unflappable, seemed on edge. "What's happening?" I asked Dorian one morning, when I found him personally checking the locks on the East Wing doors. He hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell me. Finally, "There's been an incident. Rogues attacked a patrol on the southern border. 3 guards injured, 1 seriously. He paused, his scarred face grim. His Majesty is displeased. Displeased. The word felt inadequate for whatever emotion could make the entire palace hold its breath. That afternoon, I was reviewing supply requisitions when Celine appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. His Majesty has called an emergency staff meeting. Main hall, 5 minutes. Attendance is mandatory. The main hall was already filling when I arrived. Dozens of staff members crowding in, their faces reflecting the same confusion and concern I felt. The room fell silent when Demon entered, flanked by his senior guards and several people I recognized as high-ranking advisors. He looked different, harder. The man who had bought Emma a birthday cake, who had apologized for nearly running into me, was gone. This was the Alpha King from the stories. Cold, dangerous, absolutely in control. Most of you are aware of the attack on our southern border, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. What you may not know is that this was not a random incident. The rogues were organized, well-equipped, and specifically targeted our patrols. This suggests coordination, planning. Someone is testing our defenses. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Demon's dark eyes swept across us, and I felt the weight of his attention even before his gaze found mine. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Concern, maybe, or warning, before the cold mask returned. The palace will be on heightened security until further notice, he continued. No one enters or leaves without explicit permission. Staff quarters will have additional patrols. If you see anything unusual, anyone unfamiliar, you report it immediately to your supervisor or the nearest guard. He paused, letting the severity of his words sink in. We are likely facing a coordinated threat. Your safety is my priority, but I need your vigilance. After he dismissed us, I felt a hand on my arm. Dorian, his expression grave. His Majesty wants to see you, his private study. Now. My stomach dropped. Why? He didn't say. But Sarah? He glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. Be careful. He's different when threats emerge, more protective. Sometimes dangerously so. The walk to Demon's study felt longer than before. Each step weighted with dread. What could he possibly need to discuss with me? I was just staff, insignificant in the larger machinery of palace politics and defense. The guard at his door opened it without announcement, as if I was expected. I stepped inside to find Demon standing at his window again, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with tension. Close the door, he said without turning. I did. The soft click seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Your Majesty, Dorian said you wanted to. I'm moving you and Emma to the inner residential wing. He turned, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. Tonight. The East Wing is too exposed, too accessible from the outer grounds. You'll have a suite near the royal family quarters. That's not necessary. We're fine where we are. It wasn't a request, Sarah. His voice was hard, commanding, brooking no argument. You and Emma are under my protection now. That means I decide where you're safest. Something in his tone, in the possessive way he said, my protection, sent warning bells ringing through my mind. This was more than general concern for staff safety. This was personal. Why? I asked quietly. Why are you doing this? You're not just anything, he interrupted, moving toward me with predatory grace. How many times do I have to tell you that before you believe it? He stopped close, too close, and I could see the conflict raging behind his eyes. Whatever he was feeling, whatever drove this protective instinct, it clearly ran deeper than he wanted to admit. Your Majesty, Demon, he said roughly. When we're alone, call me Demon. The intimacy of it, the boundary he was asking me to cross, made my pulse thunder in my ears. This was dangerous territory. He was the Alpha King. I was a widow employed by the palace. Whatever this growing tension between us was, it couldn't lead anywhere good. But when I opened my mouth to refuse, to maintain the appropriate distance, what came out instead was Demon. His eyes darkened at the sound of his name on my lips. For a heartbeat, I thought he might close the remaining distance between us, might do something that would irrevocably change the nature of our relationship. Instead, he stepped back, jaw tight, hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "The move will happen tonight," he said, his voice carefully controlled again. "Guards will help transport your belongings. You'll be safer there. Emma will be safer there." He said it like a vow, like a promise he was making to himself as much as to me. And despite all my reservations, despite knowing this was complicated in ways I didn't fully understand, I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Someone was protecting us, someone powerful enough to make that protection mean something. For a woman who'd spent 2 years feeling invisible and vulnerable, that was a dangerous thing to offer. It was also nearly impossible to resist. The suite in the inner residential wing was absurd in its luxury. High ceilings with intricate molding, windows that overlooked private gardens instead of public courtyards, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than staff housing. Emma's room had a canopy bed draped in soft fabric, and when she saw it, she actually gasped. "Mama, are you sure this is for us?" she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the illusion. "I'm sure," I said, though I felt the same disbelief. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep in her princess bed, I stood at the window looking out at the moonlit gardens. The palace felt different from up here, less like a place of work, and more like a fortress, protective and isolating in equal measure. I could see guards patrolling below, their movements precise and vigilant. Somewhere in this vast building, Demon was probably awake too, coordinating defenses, strategizing responses to threats I couldn't begin to understand. The thought of him, of the way he'd looked at me in his study, the protective edge in his voice, made my skin feel too warm. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door expecting a guard, but found Dorian instead, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry for the late hour. His Majesty asked me to deliver this." He handed me a small wrapped package. He wanted to ensure Emma had something to help her feel settled in her new room. Inside was a stuffed wolf, beautifully crafted with soft gray fur and amber glass eyes that caught the light. There was a note in that same elegant script I'd seen before, for Emma. "May she always feel safe, D." My throat tightened. This man, this powerful, dangerous king, was thinking about my daughter's comfort in the middle of a security crisis. The contradiction between his reputation and his actions toward us was becoming impossible to ignore. "Please thank him," I said quietly. Dorian nodded, but didn't leave immediately. "Mrs. Morrison, Sarah, His Majesty doesn't do things like this. Moving staff to royal quarters, personal gifts, the attention he's shown you." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Just be aware that people will talk. Some will be jealous. Others will assume things that may or may not be true." "And what do you assume?" I asked, meeting his eyes. "I assume," he said slowly, "that His Majesty sees something in you that he doesn't see in others, whether that's simply recognition of your worth as a person or something more." He shrugged. "That's between you and him, but be careful, Sarah. Proximity to power can be as dangerous as it is protective." After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed, turning the stuffed wolf over in my hands. What was happening here? What was Demon doing? And more importantly, what did he want? The practical part of me, the part that had survived widowhood and poverty, screamed warnings about getting too close to fire, but another part, smaller and quieter, whispered that maybe this fire might keep us warm instead of burning us. Days passed in strange suspension. The palace remained on high alert, but no new attacks came. I threw myself into work, maintaining routines even as everything felt shifted and uncertain. Emma adjusted to our new quarters with the easy adaptability of children, treating the luxury as simply her new normal. I saw Demon only in passing, glimpses in corridors, his voice carrying from meeting rooms I passed, his presence felt even when not seen. Each time our eyes met, even briefly, I felt that same electric charge, that same sense of something unspoken building between us. Then, exactly 1 week after we'd moved, I received a summons, not a request, A summons. Dinner. My private dining room. 8 o'clock. D. I stared at the note, my heart racing. This was crossing lines that hadn't even been drawn yet. Private dinners weren't something King shared with staff members. This was personal, intimate, dangerous. I should decline. Make an excuse. Maintain boundaries. I wore my best dress, the one that wasn't quite nice enough but was the closest I had, and arrived at 7:58. The private dining room was smaller than I'd expected, designed for comfort rather than ceremony. A table set for two, candles providing soft light, windows open to let in the cool evening air, and Demon, standing when I entered, wearing simple dark clothes that somehow made him look more intimidating than any formal attire could. "You came," he said, and there was relief in his voice. "You summoned me," I replied. "Did I have a choice?" "Always." He moved to pull out my chair. "With me, Sarah, you always have a choice." The meal was extraordinary, food I couldn't name but that melted on my tongue. Wine that tasted like summer evenings and promises. We ate in silence at first, the weight of unspoken things making conversation feel impossible. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I owe you an explanation." "For which part?" I asked. "The job, the housing, moving us to royal quarters, this dinner?" "All of it." He leaned back, and I watched him struggle with how to begin. "When I heard you in the marketplace, asking for expired cake for your daughter, something inside me shifted. I've spent years making decisions that affect thousands, dealing with politics and power plays and threats. But in that moment, hearing your voice, seeing your love for Emma despite your circumstances, it reminded me what actually matters." "So, this is charity?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "No." The word was sharp, definitive. "This is recognition. You're smart, capable, strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical power. You're exactly the kind of person who should be supported, elevated, protected." He paused. "And you make me feel something I haven't felt in a very long time." My breath caught. "What?" "Human," he said quietly. "Like I'm more than just a king, more than just a weapon for my people to wield. When I'm near you, I remember there's a person underneath all of this." The vulnerability in his admission was staggering. This was the Alpha King, feared and respected across territories, admitting that he felt lost in his own role. That somehow, impossibly, I helped ground him. "Demon," I said his name carefully, watching how his eyes darkened when I used it. "I don't understand what you want from me." He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside my chair, bringing us to eye level. This close, I could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the burden he carried in the set of his shoulders. "I want to know you," he said simply. "I want to hear about Emma's day and what makes you laugh. I want to understand how someone who's lost so much can still be so full of grace and strength. I want..." He stopped, jaw clenching. "I want things I probably have no right to want." My hand moved before I could stop it, reaching out to touch his face. His eyes closed at the contact, and I felt him lean into my palm like a man starving for gentle touch. "What if I want those things too?" I whispered. His eyes opened, and the heat in them made my breath catch. "Then we're both in dangerous territory." "I've been in danger before," I said. "I've survived worse than wanting something I shouldn't have." He turned his face to press a kiss to my palm, and the tenderness of it nearly undid me. This wasn't the brutal king from stories. This was a man capable of profound gentleness, of careful consideration, of holding power with restraint. "Sarah," he breathed against my skin, "if we do this, if we explore what this is between us, there will be complications. People will talk. Some will try to use you against me. You and Emma could become targets. We're already targets," I pointed out. "You moved us to royal quarters because of security threats. At least this way, if there's danger, there's also this." "This," he repeated, something almost like wonder in his voice. He stood, pulling me up with him, and suddenly we were close enough that I could feel his heartbeat, could see the way his pupils had dilated, could sense the restraint it took for him not to close the remaining distance. "I should go," I said, not moving. "You should," he agreed, not releasing me. We stood like that, balanced on the edge of something that felt inevitable and terrifying. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back. "Go," he said roughly. "Before I forget how to be careful with things that matter." I left, my legs shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might escape my chest. Behind me, I heard something crash. A glass, maybe, or a plate. And his frustrated curse. Whatever was happening between us, it was real, powerful, and completely impossible to ignore any longer. The next morning brought chaos. I woke to urgent pounding on my door, Emma stirring in confusion beside me. She'd crawled into my bed sometime during the night, seeking comfort in the unfamiliar space. I threw on a robe and opened the door to find a guard I didn't recognize, his face pale with urgency. "Mrs. Morrison, you and your daughter need to come with me. Now, there's been a breach." My blood turned to ice. What kind of breach? Rogues. Inside the palace grounds. His Majesty has ordered all non-essential personnel to the secure wing. He was already moving, expecting us to follow. "Quickly, please." I grabbed Emma, wrapping her in a blanket, and ran. The corridors were controlled chaos, guards rushing past, staff being herded toward designated safe areas, the distant sound of something that might have been fighting. Emma clung to me, her small body trembling, and I held her tighter, whispering reassurances I didn't entirely believe. The secure wing was deep in the palace's interior, a reinforced space designed to withstand sieges. Dozens of staff and their families were already there, fear evident on every face. I found a corner and settled with Emma, stroking her hair, singing softly to calm her racing heart. Hours passed. We heard nothing, knew nothing. The uncertainty was almost worse than actual danger. I kept thinking about Demon. Was he fighting? Was he safe? The thought of him injured or worse made my chest constrict with fear that had nothing to do with my own safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dorian appeared. His uniform was torn, blood, not his own, I hoped, splattered across his chest. But he was smiling, exhausted, but victorious. "It's over," he announced to the room. "The rogues have been captured or driven off. His Majesty is unharmed." His eyes found mine. "He's asking for you." I hesitated, not wanting to leave Emma. But Margaret was there, materializing as if summoned, her kind face creased with concern but steady. "I'll stay with her," she promised. "Go." Demon was in the war room, a space I'd never seen before, filled with maps and tactical displays. He stood at the center, issuing orders to his commanders, his voice sharp and authoritative. But when I entered, when his eyes found mine, everything else seemed to fade. "Leave us," he commanded. His guards exchanged glances but obeyed, filing out until we were alone. The moment the door closed, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms. The embrace was desperate, all pretense of appropriate distance abandoned. I felt him shaking, this powerful man who commanded armies, trembling as he held me. "You're safe," he breathed into my hair. "Thank God you're safe. So are you," I whispered back, my hands fisting in his torn shirt. I was so afraid, I know. He pulled back just enough to cut my face, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. "I know, because I felt the same terror. The thought of them reaching you, reaching Emma." His jaw clenched. I would have burned the entire palace down before I let that happen. The intensity of his words, the raw emotion in his eyes, told me everything I needed to know about what I meant to him. This wasn't charity or simple attraction. This was something deeper, something that had been building since that first moment in the marketplace. "Demon," I said, his name like a prayer, like a question, like an answer all at once. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce and claiming, a declaration that carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. I kissed him back with equal intensity, my hands sliding into his dark hair, pulling him closer. He tasted like copper and smoke and something indefinably him, and I felt like I was falling and flying simultaneously. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "I can't pretend anymore," he said roughly. "I can't pretend you're just staff, just someone I'm helping. You're more than that. You've been more than that since I first heard your voice." "I know," I whispered. "I feel it too. This connection, this pull, it terrifies me." "Good." His laugh was shaky. "Because it terrifies me too. But Sarah, I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of carrying everything by myself. I want—" He stopped, searching for words. "I want you beside me. Not as staff, not as some hidden thing, but as my partner. My equal." My breath caught. "You're talking about being my chosen mate," he finished. "My queen. I'm talking about building a life together. About giving Emma not just security, but a family. About choosing each other every day despite the complications and the dangers and the gossip. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. Queens came from noble families, from political alliances, from carefully arranged matches. They didn't come from the lower district, didn't arrive as widowed staff members begging for expired cake. But when I looked into his eyes, when I felt the sincerity of his offer, the genuine hope and fear warring in his expression, I realized something crucial. None of that mattered. Not to him. Not really. "People will never accept it," I said quietly. "They'll say I manipulated you, used Emma to—" "Let them talk." His voice was hard now, commanding. "I am the Alpha King. I don't need permission or approval to choose my mate, and anyone who questions my choice will answer to me." The protective fury in his tone made me believe him. This man would defend his decisions, would defend me against anyone, even his own people. "What about Emma?" I asked. "This would make her—" "A princess," he said simply. "My daughter, if she'll have me. Sarah, I don't just want you. I want both of you. I want to give her everything: education, protection, opportunities, love. I want to be what her father can't be anymore." Tears stung my eyes. The generosity of it, the completeness of his offer, was almost too much to bear. He wasn't just offering me a crown. He was offering Emma a father, a future, a chance at the kind of life I'd never dared dream possible. "Say yes," he urged, his hands framing my face again. "Say you'll take this leap with me. Say you'll let me love you both." I thought about Emma sleeping peacefully in our suite, about the stuffed wolf he'd given her, about every small kindness he'd shown us. I thought about his vulnerability in admitting his loneliness, his courage in risking rejection. I thought about how alive I felt when I was near him, how seen and valued and cherished. "Yes," I whispered. His smile transformed his face, genuine joy replacing the careful control he usually maintained. He kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, like he was memorizing the taste of this moment. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I'll do this properly," he promised. Formal announcement, public ceremony, everything. But Sarah, in my heart, you've been mine since that day in the marketplace. Since I heard you ask for cake for your daughter and realized there was still goodness in this world worth protecting. 3 months later, I stood in the great hall wearing a gown that felt like wearing moonlight. Emma stood beside me in a smaller version, her light blonde hair crowned with flowers, her smile so bright it rivaled the sun. The hall was filled with nobles and dignitaries, staff and citizens, all gathered to witness something unprecedented. Demon stood at the altar in formal attire, looking every inch the powerful king he was. But when his eyes found mine, when he saw me walking toward him with our daughter's hand in mine, his expression softened into something tender and vulnerable. The ceremony was traditional, but adapted. Emma wasn't just watching her mother marry a king. She was being formally adopted, recognized as heir and princess in her own right. When Demon knelt before her, offering not just vows to me, but promises to her, my daughter looked at him with trust and growing love. "I promise to protect you," he told Emma seriously, "to guide you, to support your dreams, to be worthy of being called your father, if you'll have me." Emma looked at me, seeking permission or reassurance. I nodded, tears streaming freely down my face. She turned back to Demon and said in her clear, brave voice, "I'll have you. I'll have both of you." The hall erupted in cheers. That night, after all the celebration and ceremony, after Emma had fallen asleep in her new room in the royal quarters, Demon and I stood on our private balcony overlooking the city, his arms wrapped around me from behind, and I leaned back into his strength. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. Saying yes to all of this, I turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd heard me at my lowest moment, and decided I deserved elevation rather than pity. The man who'd seen value where others saw only poverty. The man who'd chosen love over political convenience. "Not for a single second," I promised. "You saved us, Demon. You gave us everything." "No," he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "You saved me, Sarah. You reminded me that power means nothing without compassion. That strength includes gentleness. That even kings need someone to come home to." He tilted my chin up, his dark eyes holding mine with absolute certainty. "You and Emma, you're my home now. My purpose. My everything." I kissed him then, pouring all my gratitude and love and hope into it. Around us, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in the palace, our daughter slept peacefully, finally safe and cherished and home. We had come so far from that desperate moment in the marketplace, from expired cake to a crown, from invisible to unmissable, from surviving to truly living, and it had all started with a simple question, asked in desperation, heard by someone who chose to answer with kindness rather than indifference. Sometimes the most powerful magic wasn't in strength or strategy or dominance. Sometimes it was simply in seeing someone, truly seeing them, and choosing to care. Demon had seen me when I was invisible to everyone else, and in return, I'd seen the man beneath the crown, the heart beneath the armor, the lonely soul searching for connection. We'd found each other against all odds, across impossible divides, and now, standing together in the moonlight, we were writing a new story, one where love mattered more than lineage, where compassion carried more weight than convention, where a widow from the lower district and an alpha king could build something beautiful and lasting and real. The fairy tale wasn't in the crown or the palace or the power. It was in the choosing. In two broken people deciding to heal together, to build together, to love together despite every reason not to. And as Demon held me close, as the night wrapped around us like a blessing, I knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. Our story wasn't ending. It was finally, truly beginning. Together.